All right, everyone. Today we have a gift. We are taking this podcast a little bit in a different direction where we now want to invite our guests on and take an idea and dive deep into it. And so today we're really excited because we have Ryan Carter with us. And today we talk about the impact of a business owner on their team and how to be transformational, not just transactional with them. Little background on Ryan before we dive in. He grew up in Wisconsin with a small town where they don't have a stoplight and probably never will. From there, he went to the Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs, stayed there 4 years, and then served in the Air Force for another 2. And now, flash forward to today, Ryan and his family have been in Fort Collins for almost 10 years, and he's a financial advisor with Edward Jones that specializes in working with business owners. So out of all that, we give you that background because Ryan brings a lot of wisdom to this conversation and gets to the heart of it, of why it's important to not just think about the number of your business, and has some great analogies and stories. There's an analogy of a turtle sitting on a fence and how it got there. That relates to a sports team he was involved with. And even in the beginning, talks about this analogy of a town with a railroad track down the middle and 2 different sides and how they interact differently and the eternal vision and scope of that neighborhood. So a lot of good things in this episode. Excited for you to join us, and yeah, sit down with Ryan. So Ryan, thank you for joining us this morning. I know Hunter and I are very excited to dive in. You are a very well-spoken, wise individual who is trying to impact Fort Collins and beyond. So we're really excited to go deep with you today. To start, just jumping right in, I wanted to see if you could tell us why you were excited to dive into the idea of how business owners can impact their team and shepherd them well. And then maybe in that you can talk about particularly why that's passionate to you. Like why, when Hunter was talking about the podcast, was that one of the things that came to mind? Like, man, I really want to dive in on that.
Yeah, I appreciate the question, and thanks for having me here.
No,
very excited to spend an hour with you guys and talk about all this.
An hour? No, I'm just kidding.
We're going an extended session, aren't we? It's going to be that good.
It's going to be a 2-parter.
Yeah, that's right. I think, Chris, every time we have any sort of leadership position, whether it's family, whether it's in our business, whether it's in our community neighborhood, we have an opportunity to set environment and set culture. And everyone operating in that culture is affected by it, and they're not necessarily aware of it. And so that's a very high level, but when you set that culture or impact your team in a positive way, they're being impacted by the atmosphere in the room, and it changes how they do all of life.
Right.
It changes how they interact with the person they're getting their coffee from. It changes the way they interact with their kids, with their spouse when they get home. And that through those interactions, it changes the world. And that's frankly what I'm after, what we're all after, I think. And so we have to be very honest with ourselves that the ways that we're interacting with our people are affecting not only the job they're doing, but it's affecting them. It's affecting a human being.
Right. So good. Your passion is contagious. I love it.
Thanks, man. I appreciate that.
It seems like we've noticed this trend, whether or not we've touched on this direct topic from a few of our other guests who I think are running their business well, is that they have a great idea of value outside of the business. I think of Nate with To The T, who's a plumber, who talked about the fact that he's all about family. And so sure, there's busy seasons, but really he's always encouraging his employees and team to ground into the family because that's bigger than plumbing. And so I'm sensing that as well from you, but it seems like you're even taking it a step further and saying, I want it to be contagious to everything. So is there a particular mission or vision statement that you tied with that to kind of encourage your team of how far that can extend instead of putting it in a little box?
Yes. My vision that I hold myself to, I want to positively impact leaders of family, business, and community every day to change my community, to transform my community, to transform the world. And so if I'm touching somebody in a way, big or small, that's going to positively impact them, that's going to lift them to a higher place of interactions with their sphere of influence, then I'm changing the world. I picture picture a small town. I grew up in Wisconsin. Rural town still doesn't have a stoplight. Will never have a stoplight. Okay, so the population is the same number as when I grew up there, and I'm blessed. My folks still live in the same house I grew up in.
Come on.
So picture a small rural town, and there's 10 families that live there, and there's railroad tracks runs right down the middle of the town, and there's 5 families on one side, 5 families on the other side. And let's say there's 10 businesses. There's 5 businesses on one side and there's 5 businesses on the other side. And you maybe see where I'm going. On one side of the tracks, these families love, honor, serve each other. They look out for the best interest of their neighbor. In business, they're honest. They serve well. When they do a plumbing job or a floor job or whatever the work is, a media job, they do it to the best of their ability. They make sure it's going to last. And on the other side of the tracks, we have the opposite. We have everyone looking out for themselves. We have everyone on the business side not doing honest business, etc. So you see the picture I'm painting, and very quickly you have 2 different worlds. And we see that all over the world today.
Right.
And the only way to change it is one family on the wrong side of the tracks catches a vision of transformation. And you have to start then sowing seeds. And the first time you love your neighbor, they're going to look at you like a weirdo. We don't do that on this side of the tracks. And then to be able to consistently sow the right seeds of love and honor, appreciation, forgiveness over time, then you start to change a culture. And so, yeah, that's what you see in a business. You have an employee come into a business with a toxic culture, and they're going to automatically start to be polluted, I guess, for lack of better terms, by that culture. It'll affect their work, and then more importantly, it affects the bottom line of the business and the family, the whole deal.
Right. Yeah, I love that. And I'm curious because if there was a business owner that was listening to this that is saying, I love that idea. I want to be a light in my community. But where do I even start? Like, what does that mean for me and my family? Like, how do we begin that process? What does that look like?
I think with that question, so if anyone's asking that question, they already started the process because that's that seed that, was just planted. Certainly we got to do the X's and O's right in our business. Right. We have to do that excellent. We have to make it a priority to be the very best that we can be and not cut corners. So that has to be foundational because we can't go and do something that's maybe off the main track of our business if we're not doing our business with excellence.
Absolutely.
So as far as how to get started, this is really where the planning, I think, does come in. You have to be very purposeful to do something that isn't directly related maybe to your bottom line. Maybe it's indirectly related to your bottom line, but it's not directly. So I think it's very easy just to let that bottom line, and I'm talking about the CFO's bottom line, to run everything.
Yeah.
And so when you say, I'm going to start running a transformational business, you have to have accountability. You have to have relationship that holds you to that, whether it's a business coach, life coach, friend, etc. And then do something small. I encourage people to do one thing a week that's out of the ordinary for you, that is away from yourself. That is not that's not self-serving.
So good.
For me, I never dreamed of being in the finance or money world. It was never my dream. And when I was called into it, I knew that I would be able to get off track quickly. And so I said, I'm going to go serve people that can never serve me. And I got involved with the homeless shelter and the rescue shelter here in Fort Collins, and just began serving people that I could never do business for. Right. Because I wanted to keep my heart from chasing the bottom line, just chasing the business results, and keep it soft towards my community.
So good. So good. And that's the whole point of these conversations in this business podcast, is we called it Beyond Business because same as you, we have a heartbeat for our communities and doing more than just business and caring more about just the bottom line.
Yeah.
I love that, man. I think that speaks to your character a ton and convicts me that a lot of times I sometimes serve people because I know I might get something out of it. There might be a good deal, there might be a good whatever.
Yeah.
So I think challenges me and hopefully challenges other people to take a step out to really love on people and serve people with no expectation of getting anything back.
And there will be more return.
Amen.
Than you can imagine.
Yeah,
it's
so good.
It's so strange. It's like a workout. It's like you don't want to go work out until you consistently fill that bucket, and then all of a sudden you want to do it. You want to get after it. But to start that habit, you don't want to. But as soon as you work out, hour later, you're like, I'm the man. Like, I got it done.
Got the pump going.
Yeah, that's right. You're flying all day.
Yeah, I wanted to circle back on, you said the idea of a seed, and I love it when people use that analogy. But in a world where people want instant gratification, when you say seed, I'm thinking 5, 10 years, a lifetime, right? And you might not even see the rewards of that. And so I want to hash that idea out a little bit better, of maybe going countercultural and saying you need to start sowing these seeds and be okay with the idea that it might take a really long time, or you may never you probably won't see the full impact, right? Like if you were to have an employee that worked for you for 5 years and then maybe they transitioned out and you made impact and you never touch base with them again, you might not know the impact you had on them and what they're doing now. So maybe in there, I don't know if there's a necessarily straightforward question, but I wanted to hash that out a little bit more of maybe how you personally have pushed back against the instant gratification and then have maybe helped others do the same.
I love that. And I don't want to say it's easy, because it's not. We do want instant gratification. And I think it really does come back to the heart work of, who am I? What is my legacy? You hear years ago that went around the thing about, you look at a gravestone and the birth date, the death date, and the dash, and what's your dash?
Right.
And I was just talking to my kids about that the other day, and they didn't, I'm always giving them random stuff. They're like, oh, here goes dad again. But it's, who do I want to be then? On that day, I often think about that to get myself off of the myopic focus on today and the bottom line and the goals of the day. Who do I want to be on that day when I truly am ready to pass out of this world into the next? And to be driven by that, to be driven by eternity is how I say it. So I think it does take a very intentional lifestyle. It takes building affirmations for yourself, telling yourself who you are and what your life is for and what it's about. I was going down on a trip to Trinidad, Colorado. Okay, not Trinidad and Tobago, and I was just going down there to serve some friends and to help them start this ministry in their barn. And I was grumpy, and I didn't want to go. It's a 4-hour drive, like just not into it. Right. And I told them this too, so if they're listening, they already know the story. And I was praying because my heart was wrong. And I think as we're building this lifestyle, we have to be honest. If we don't want, like somewhere in us, in our intellect or somewhere in us, we want that. But if we're honest, we don't want it. And that's this fight between two natures, and to be honest and say, I don't want that. I'm not into that. And I was praying because I felt my heart wrong. And I said, God, why am I so grumpy about this trip? And God cut to the deepest part, and he said, there's nothing in it for you, Ryan. And it cut me super deep because I realized when he said that was the truth. I didn't want to go. I was grumpy about the trip because there was nothing in it for me. So then in realizing that, I was able to really turn around from that thought process, repent from it, and then go. And it was such a totally engaging, thrilling trip. I came home with a full heart.
Come on. That
impacts my business. That impacts my family. So once you start planting those seeds and seeing the fruit of it, it's phenomenal. But you have to believe. It's like starting a business. I mean, it's not that different, right? You plant some seeds and you don't grow like necessarily super fast right at the beginning, but you keep planting, you keep serving, you keep building, and then once you start hitting that growth curve, I guess maybe that's the best analogy for people listening to this podcast that have maybe had that experience. So you got to trust that those results are coming.
So good.
Yeah. And I mean, elephant in the room, I really want to touch on this. All three of us personally are committed to the Christian worldview and Christian faith, but I'm assuming you would look someone in the eye and say, you do not have to be a Christian to commit to this.
Yeah.
I think we would be remiss if we said that wasn't part of the grander vision here. But I'm assuming you also call people to a higher standard and say, this is not, like, you don't have to be having personal conversations with God for this to happen. Would you agree with that or disagree? Like, how does that conversation go with people who maybe don't see that the same way?
Without a doubt. I love the question. The book I read, the Bible, says that the kingdom of heaven is righteousness, peace, and joy. Nobody, I don't care what creed that you have or what background, nobody would argue with those things. Righteousness, peace, and joy. That's the kingdom that I represent in my Christian worldview, as you put it. And so if I'm bringing righteousness, peace, and joy to my business, that will never fail me, and it will never fail my people. And so the goal isn't necessarily to go out and I would say the goal is to season the world with those things, season my neighborhood with those things, because it's going to raise everybody up. It's going to raise the whole, that rising tide is going to raise all the ships. And so let's not get wrapped around that axle. For instance, I've been encouraging my neighbors, on this kind of this concept. And I pray for my neighbors. And many of them know I'm a Christian, many of them don't, And the other day, my neighbor comes with an idea and says, hey, 2 doors down, we have a neighbor with a broken window. By the way, this neighbor had 40 SWAT cars in the neighborhood last summer. So they don't necessarily bring, all the best stuff. And my neighbor has an idea, says, hey, let's love our neighbor. Let's get together, pool resources. Everybody give into this project. We're going to fix their window. How does that not work for everybody?
Right.
And raise the tide of our neighborhood, and then how does that impact the bottom line? If we have that kind of activity in our neighborhood, house sales in the neighborhood is going to sell for more.
Right.
I promise. And then everybody's home value goes up. So you do this stuff, and it does impact your bottom line too. So I don't know if I answered that question well, but hopefully did you have a follow-on question there? I don't know if, again,
righteousness, joy, and peace. I think that's the whole answer right there.
Amen.
Yeah. You just did a beautiful job hashing it out further.
Yeah. I love that. So good.
Yeah. I did have a follow-up. I don't know.
Yeah, go ahead.
I guess within that particular example of serving the neighbor, this is kind of funny as you're hashing it out, because it sounds like terrible business advice of this overall approach, right? I'm going to go serve things and do things that are not going to immediately affect my bottom line, right? That seems very against the message of what a business should be doing. It should be all about planting the seeds of growth and taking care of the best clients, and those seem like the more traditional routes, whereas this seems like the exact opposite. Right. So maybe, if let's say I'm a business owner, newer in the game, or I've been in business a long time and just don't see it this way. Have you run into that before, where you've had to help someone with that shift of it's not all about the bottom line, and even though it seems odd, like this is, even if, you serving the homeless shelter never leads to a new client, the fact that that personal commitment and passion drives so much more inside the business.
Yeah. And I would put it this way. I have a good friend. He's a developer, and he's developed a tremendous amount of real estate, an extraordinarily wealthy man. And I was walking through his neighborhood. We hiked together, and it's not in Fort Collins here, but he said, it's down in Broadmoor in Colorado Springs. Okay. And he said, Ryan, up here, he's talking about the Broadmoor, there's more suicides than anybody will tell you. And nobody writes about it. The news doesn't report it. He said, but it happens all the time, because when you're this wealthy and it still isn't working, there's no hope. And I learned from that man how many people have their ladder leaning up against the wrong wall. And it is a lie, and it will break you eventually to Just build your own kingdom, build your own bottom line. You sell your company. Another friend in Denver, he's in mergers and acquisitions, and he's been in this space forever. And he helps somebody sell their company, and it's $15 million. Now all of a sudden their identity is a number. And they built this business their whole life. They sell it for $15 million, and now that's their identity. And it doesn't work. It doesn't work, you guys. And so I'm just saying that we all know that. We all know deep in us that that is the wrong finish line.
Right.
And yet, everything in the world, shoot, I'm in the money business. I get it, right? Like, hey, grow this, make it bigger. Right. I get that. We have to do that. But when that is the soul finish line, it breaks our soul. And at the end, we are not satisfied. And that's what my friend in the Broadmoor taught me as a young 20-something-year-old man, is the number of people, and to our guests on the listening to the show, maybe some of you are there, and you can change that trajectory now, because at some point the poverty of soul overwhelms, and we got to try to fill that up with something. And maybe I digress a little bit, but that's why it's extraordinarily important to be honest with ourselves. In my business, I know this: retirement is doing a great job at really turning a lot of people off. You retire and you have people feel like they have no purpose, right? Not everybody, right? But we were made to produce something. Doesn't mean you have to work forever. I call it work optional. So in my business, we want to not simply build a portfolio, not simply plan for retirement or various goals, whether they be real estate goals or business goals or taking care of various business needs, retirement plans, etc., but to say why. Why? And my buddy says this way. He says, anybody can make money, but once you get it, what do you do with it? So
yeah, that's really good. That hope piece is convicting, of like, once you make it and there's no hope, that's a crappy place to be, for sure. And I'm curious if that is true even for the person that is doing good works, of, even serving, that, might not believe in Jesus, but is serving a bunch. And I feel like there is still that place too, where I'm serving so much, but I still also don't feel hope. So I'd love to talk about that piece, if we could, of like, okay, we can do so much, and there still might be most of the things that we can do don't really provide us with the truest hope, which really is the gospel of Jesus. And the three of us, wholeheartedly believe in that, and that provides the greatest hope for us. Like you can make all of the money, you can even serve all of the people, but at the end of the day, if you don't have the hope of Jesus and what he did on the cross for us, then I think that is still going to be lingering, even if we do good works of serving at the homeless shelter and X, Y, and Z, right? So I don't know if there's anything you guys want to add to that, but just thought that was a convicting point for me after you said that.
Yeah, super well said, Hunter. I mean, anyone that's built a business knows that you don't light a match, throw it on dynamite, and when the dust settles, you have a beautiful business.
Right.
So why do we believe that's how the earth came to be? Why do we believe that? It's the most ridiculous concept that I've ever considered.
Yeah.
I was in the Air Force, and very close to multi-billion-dollar aircraft, and have friends that fly them today. You don't just go into a junkyard and set off a grenade, and when all the pieces settle, you've got an F-22. That doesn't work.
Right.
And so we have to be honest with ourselves, and cut the. I think some of the talking points out there, or the storylines, that doesn't make sense. Anyone that's ever built something, I don't care how long it took. Order doesn't come out of disorder. So God created the world.
Yeah.
And we all, they say there's no atheists in a foxhole. I was in the Air Force. I've had friends die for our country. And we've heard that saying, there's no atheists in a foxhole. On your last day, you're going to wonder what's coming next. And truly, the love of God It does. It covers over all of this. It is the thing that makes me go to Trinidad when there's nothing in it for me. So
Come on. So good.
Yeah, it's actually a very beautiful natural segue. I want to visit your past in the Air Force a little more. And one of the pieces of that is I was wondering if there's any specific training or experience, either you being led or having a leader in that background, that you either got a good or bad piece of this philosophy and approach you have to business from your experience in the Air Force, and then also maybe fill in our listeners really quickly on how long you were in the Air Force. I think that'd be helpful for some background as well.
Sure. Yeah, the original dream was to be a pilot in the Air Force. I went to the Air Force Academy, and I gave up the pilot dream because I felt like God called me to something else. So when the pilot dream was gone, I only spent 2 years in the Air Force. So I was a short timer as far as my active duty. Air Force Academy tacked on another 4 years there. But I was really fortunate, and I didn't realize that even from a young boy playing sports, I had phenomenal leadership almost my whole life. And I didn't realize the blessing that was to me. Because when you have it, you don't know you have it. You don't know the other side. I hardly had a coach that didn't love me. I hardly had a commander that didn't genuinely care about me. When I got out of the Air Force, I went to work for the Fellowship of Christian Athletes, and I started working with coaches all over. And I began to see negative coaching. I began to see negative leadership. And they always taught us in the Air Force, you learn from every leader. You either learn how to lead or how not to lead. And I'm not saying it was all perfect, but I would say that you reproduce what you are. And if you've been around CSU or Mountain West football for 15, 20 years or more, you know Fisher DeBerry. He was a legendary coach at the Air Force Academy. And there's not a coach or a man that I've ever known that loved his employees, players, more than that man. He deeply, deeply cared about us as young men. And he made sure that we knew that. And it created this unity on our team. And that only helps you win. We loved each other because he set an atmosphere of love. We warred for each other because he set that atmosphere. And so he had funny sayings, and he was super quirky. He was from deep South Carolina, and he had this saying that I loved that said, I'll do an awful job trying to imitate his accent, but he said, if you see a turtle sitting on a fence post, you know it didn't get there by itself. and so he's always teaching us about, selflessness. Hey, you didn't get to where you are by yourself. There's somebody that helped you, and it's not all about you. So I would say if there was one, I would put it on him. Yeah. And he's now has a foundation that helps single moms because he was a parent of a single mom, and so that's how he's spending his retirement years. Is serving single parent families.
Wow, love that.
So
Yeah, that's powerful. I was expecting a military example, but I'll take the athletic one as well.
Yeah, my military experience wasn't super operational. Right. I could give you stories about the true warrior leaders that I had that got up with and kind of had their literal sword on, in conversations with us, compared to the leaders that were very they didn't inspire you, and that's where I just think you reproduce what you are. Yeah. You reproduce what you are, and the passion in your heart is either going to inspire your people or it's not, and that's where you come back to God, man. Everything that fills my bucket comes from him. Because I run dry, man, all the time. And you have to fill up with something.
Right.
And he's the one that fills me, and he's never failed me.
Amen.
Yeah, that's really good. I'm very curious to hear about what that's looked like at your team and the level you manage. And as you bring in employees, I imagine you're not one of your screening questions is, do you believe in God? Right. So what does that look like? Let's say day one, you bring on a new employee to help you within your business, and then maybe, do a few years out, and maybe talk through what that process looks like of, this person's going to know what I'm about before they ever work for me. Yeah. And I'm going to expect the righteousness, joy, peace, all these other values you've touched on, selflessness, all those things from them, and encourage them in that. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's a lot to bite off, right? But I think that's required if you're going to try and be a business owner that's transformational, not transactional.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a few years ago, my wife was like, Ryan, we need a backyard pool. I like to like build stuff. And she's like, look, this one says it only takes 90 minutes to put up. I'm like, yeah. So anyways, we got it. And, 5 yards of sand later and a couple weeks, pool was finally set up. And here's the point. When my kids jump in that pool, they automatically get wet. Because there's an environment in the pool that impacts everyone that's in it. Mm. So that's the answer. The environment in my office, I get to lead it. I get to set it by what's coming out of me.
Right.
And that's where we can't trick ourselves, guys. If I am selfish, one of the Air Force core values, service before self, I think it's the hardest one because we are born selfish creatures. Amen. And if I'm selfish and if I look at my employees for how much I can get out of them, okay, I'm setting a culture. Okay, I don't have to talk about it. It's not like I have it up on my whiteboard. This company is all about me, right? I don't write that up there, but the environment in my office, everyone will feel it, just like in the pool. And so that's number one, is what environment's in my heart. And again, it's hard to change the environment in your heart, especially when we're living in a world that is toxic. We're living in a world where we've been led poorly. We have toxic in our hearts because it's been put there. And so God's healed my heart on that and continues to, because it's just like you change your oil in your car, it gets dirty, right? You got to change it out. Same thing with the oil in your heart. You have to change it out regularly. So I'm setting the atmosphere that way. And you just live. You live. I was in my office and I was feeling stressed out, and I said, Jesus, you're awesome. And my office manager was right behind me, and she said, oh, well, thanks, I'm trying. And I laughed. I said, no, I wasn't talking to you. And so we had just a funny laugh about that. And so those types of things, when you live authentically, people aren't offended when you're just living authentically. And when you're loving authentically, it's different. And I mean, gosh, I fail at it all the time. And when I do, I try to fess up, be honest, be humble, be the bigger man or the smaller man in that case, just to not have to defend my own ego all the time.
Right. So good.
Which I feel like ties back to your point earlier of talking about what systems a business owner needs to set up. And one of the points you touched on was accountability. Because you said, I think we're often very bad at doing an honest analyzing of our own heart, which is why marriage is great, because your spouse just knows how to cut right to the chase. Yeah. So I want to dive into that as well and talk about what that looks like from an accountability point, whether it's someone who's working with you and sees it day to day, or it's someone on the outside that you're meeting with regularly. How do you give them the keys to make sure that they're calling out your blind spots and letting you know when the pool's not full anymore, or the pool's getting a little low, and maybe the employees aren't going to get quite as wet when they jump in. Maybe it's just going to be the feet and not the whole, head to toe.
Yeah, gosh, it's huge. It's an intentional conversation. I do it Friday mornings at 6:30. So I skipped it this morning for you guys. That's how much I love you. So
love it.
Yeah. So that's a 6:30 in the morning call with a good friend of mine. We see the world the same way, and both have goals to run our businesses well and to use those businesses as a platform to transform our community. So it's just regular. And when we beat ourselves up when we get off track or we do it wrong, and you will do it wrong. I'm doing it. I probably feel bad about myself a lot more than I feel good about myself. And so I think just to be honest with that and to bring that before the people that we trust, when you say something out loud, it's shaping the environment, the soul level or the energy in the room is how some people would call it. I would call it the spiritual environment in the room. So when I say to my buddy, man, I just really feel like I'm missing it. And it's making me feel bad about myself. It's making me feel bad about my production. It's making me feel bad about what God's calling me to do and that I'm missing it. And when I say those things, it breaks the power of it that just kills me when it's living up here in my mind. When it lives alone in the quiet, it has power over me. When I release it or confess it, it breaks the power of it here, and then it opens the road for us to move forward and through that, and to put it behind us and to say, okay, I recognize this is how I'm feeling, but I recognize it's not my identity, and I'm going to put it down, and then I'm going to ask you next Friday morning, ask me about this. So then I know I've got somebody I'm reporting into.
So good.
Yeah, one other piece directly relating to your team, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this. This was probably a few years ago I heard this, and it was Gary Vee on a podcast, and he was talking with a business owner who mentioned a toxic employee that had come in that was kind of upsetting and shifting the culture and not for the good. And the business owner was giving this example to Gary and said, yeah, we're super fortunate because he actually quit, and so we got him out of the environment, and so the company's right back on track. And Gary looked at him and said, no, you lost because he beat you to it. And so you didn't fire him, he quit, and so he actually won. At face value, I realize I'm not giving you the whole context here, so nothing against Gary if he ever sees our small little podcast. But at face value, do you agree with that, or do you think there's a different way of seeing that?
I don't think I have an opinion on that. That's strong, Chris. And that's another core value of mine. I will shoot you straight. When I don't have a good answer, I will always share it. I think it's really case by case. Yeah. I mean, if you're running a ship, you're the captain of the ship. I feel awful using a Navy example right now. Okay, I'm an Air Force guy. But if you're the captain of a ship and there's a situation that's sinking the ship, that's putting everybody in danger, you got to take care of it. Right. You have to. And I mean, it's part of running a business. It's part of this world we live in, right? Yeah. There are casualties, and then hopefully that person goes off and learns from their situation. So if there's something sick in the ship, whether that person jumps off or whether you have them walk the plank, I mean, you got to take care of the ship.
Wow. Love that.
Yeah, it's really good. I was going to shift a little bit, so I wanted to make sure I wasn't leaving you behind. Okay. A few more pieces to touch on, and I appreciate the notes you left in my document. This is great. I'm really curious to see if you touch on them. And maybe we've already talked about this, so I don't want to overkill it. But we've talked about the good and the positive of being intentional and trying to transform a team. Are there any other things you think of that are really difficult about it? I know you've touched on a couple good ones of fighting the selfish nature we have, sometimes having to refill the pool, realizing it's not of yourself. Is there anything else you think is important to touch on that is really hard about being this intentional and putting aside yourself?
Yeah. And I think I would reiterate the consistency over time. Because going back to our analogy of our little rural Midwestern town with 5 families on both sides of the tracks, when you do, call it a random act of kindness, or you sow love or joy or peace, when you're on the wrong side of the tracks, nothing changes that day. This situation in our neighborhood it wasn't my initiative, it was my neighbor's initiative to do this window project. We've lived there for 5 years, and that wouldn't have happened 5 years ago in our neighborhood. And again, probably more often than not, I've missed it in that particular example. Right. I haven't done my intentions of how I wanted to serve my neighbors. And so consistency through failure, through feeling like you did it wrong, but just don't stop. I don't care if you're taking a 1-inch step or you're at a full sprint. Just refuse to stop, to ever get off track. And I picture it as a mountain peak. And I may never, ever reach that peak in my life, but I'm just not going to stop taking a step towards it. And when I get off track, or when I go backwards, or when I get off the path, it's a mountain peak, so I can still see it. I know where I want to go. And that's where some of those other things, the accountability, et cetera, comes in, where I'm just going to take a step and then trust and have faith. So I think that's the big thing, is the consistency of it, where it won't work. When we try it and nothing happened, nothing changed. Okay, well, I'm just going to go back to normal. So it's like you go all in. Yeah. And when you go all in, when you're willing to do whatever it takes, you don't have to. So.
Yeah, it's really interesting how this ties back to an idea that John, who's a team member of ours, hashed out when we had him on the show. And he tied it to marketing, so it's really interesting how you're just tying it to overall business and his philosophy. And his definition of good marketing is consistent efforts over time. And basically saying, to your point, this can't happen overnight. It's weird that I'm using this example, but even in the digital world, people think you go to an ad and tomorrow you're going to get $5,000 in revenue or however much. But it's got to be that intentionality. And I think even in the approach of marketing, Gary Vee would preach the same thing. You got to deliver value first. You got to show people that you care before asking for anything. Yeah. And it seems like that's even tying to your bigger piece of just business, not just marketing or internal growth, but all of it is just care about the people first, and then you can't go wrong.
When a client comes in my office, we have to get the X's and O's right. You have to do that well. In what you all do, you have to build the ads right. You have to put them in the right places, the right time of day, et cetera. You have to do that right. It earns you the opportunity to do the stuff that matters even more. So when we're helping understand what's most important to a client, and when we're partnering together with them over time to help keep them on track to those goals, now all of a sudden there's a trust, there's a relationship that's created where I can say, hey, what's this for? What's it really for?
Right.
Okay, you want to retire at 50. Why? Yeah. What are you going to do at 50? What's your life going to be about between 50 and 90? And you can't ask that question on the first day. So exactly right. And consistent efforts, delivering good material over time, again, earns you the right to have that voice in your community. And I'm very excited about the next 30 years doing business in this community. My family's lived here for a decade. I know that the nature of growth is that it starts out at one rate and then you hit an exponential point in growth. And so I feel like this first decade of doing transformation in our city for my family and business is just the beginning. And over time, the synergies that will happen and the relationships and the impact, I pray, is significant. And that's on my best days, that's not to stroke my ego, but it's truly to serve people and the community. And one day I will leave this earth and this planet, and I'll go meet my maker. And I pray that the things I've built on this earth are precious in his sight, not just in the sight of maybe a business technician who said, wow, Ryan, you ran a great business and here were your results for your clients, from a very X and O kind of standpoint.
So good.
Yeah, Hunter, I want you to circle back on a quote you've told me before, and I want you to say it because I'm probably going to butcher it, but it's the idea of you can't shepherd the big without just shepherding the little. I don't know if you remember that idea that you've hashed, and then tying that into BBM's award for the year and why you felt like that was important to focus on going into this year, because I think it ties really well to what Ryan's hashing out here.
Yeah, that's a great question. The quote really comes from, you can't shepherd the big without shepherding the small. And so really what that means is, if you're not doing the little things excellently and efficiently and well, then you're not gonna receive more. You're not going to steward the big well. And our word for the year as a company is efficiency, simply because we really care about excellence. And as a business, we're wanting to do things that at an efficient rate where it's not impacting our clientele, or impacting the sustainable rhythms that our employees have. So, efficiency is just huge for us this year. Last year it was roots. We really wanted to dig deep to have a great foundation. And this year, we're doubling down on efficiency, which isn't as fun of a word as roots, but it just is what it is.
It's not like explosion,
Right? Dynamite.
Just efficiency. Yeah. There's one more big question I want to touch on before we kind of start wrapping this up. And as I was digging online around this idea of impacting a team and being transformational, I saw this idea that one of the things you should take in mind if you want to do this is always approach problems with enthusiasm and not defeat. And I know it's funny how you keep trying to make these natural transitions for me, so thank you for doing that.
I'm here for you, Chris.
Yeah, but as I wrote down, I said, is there a story or example that comes to mind when you think about that? Whether or not, I'm actually curious if you agree or not. I think you do, but your note, and I want you to hash this out for me, says, as a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. Why was that the idea that hit you when you read that question or idea?
That's funny because I'm not a techie guy, so I didn't realize my notes were shared out to you. Like, I get it, the cloud and everything, but it's awesome. It's
He's like, how do you know that?
Yeah. You really are a man of God. That is a core belief, and it absolutely sets the trajectory of lives and communities. 100%. You will produce out of how you think about yourself. And if I'm growing up in a culture where nothing is really expected of me, and a lot of my friends, etc., are just involved in maybe a drug culture or low performance culture, I will think about myself that way. And I will produce out of that. As a man thinketh in his heart. This is another one, Coach DeBerry. He gave this to us all the time. If we were playing Oklahoma or Alabama or, powerhouse, Notre Dame, he said, as a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. You're not worse than these teams. Okay, we were worse. Okay, but he was trying to help us to think at a greater level. Yeah. And so, going back to the analogy of if little is expected of me, if I expect little of myself, in the homeless culture, gosh, it is such bondage up here because it's how you think. And that's why in my serving of homeless people, not to digress, I got to have relationship, and I want to give dignity and honor along with, an apple or a blanket, right? Because if I can help change the way somebody thinks, 100% it'll change their destiny. Yeah. And so, and we have to do that intentionally. We have to tell ourselves what we want to tell ourselves. Right. And we have to do it on purpose, and we have to do it over and over and not stop until the scale tips and you believe it. Right. Because the path to the heart oftentimes is consistent meditation on a thought. Yeah. And if you'll consistently meditate on a certain way of thinking, it gets in you. And when you get squeezed, whatever's in you comes out.
Yeah. The way we think is powerful. Completely agreed. And it is the work of the enemy that puts us in that bondage, that especially, whether you're in poverty or whether you're in bondage about comparison or whatever. Yeah. Right. That is just the work of the enemy to put you in that cell. That's really what the gospel is all about, is like setting you free from that thinking, and letting God tell you who you are, not letting the enemy tell you who you are. Yeah. Which is, as a business owner and as a leader, is just so crucial. Like, I completely agree. You can't lead a team and influence them positively if you're in that bondage. Yeah. Like, it's just impossible. Yeah. You're gonna do more damage than you're gonna do good.
Yeah. So good. And two qualities that when they go together, it's heavenly, is, I would say, glory and humility. And so there was an ancient king, his name was David, and he said, he worshiped God, and he said, how fearfully, and he said, I worship you because I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. And that's funny because he's like, I'm awesome.
Right.
He's like, I'm wonderfully made. Like, look at me, right? And yet, when you can take that and realize I was made, I didn't make myself.
Right.
I didn't do this. But to realize that the things that you were created for are divine. You know, and you know what? A business, giving someone a job is divine. We know that in this world more than ever with COVID and everything. To give someone employment and good work to do is a divine gift.
Come on.
And just the honor and dignity of that job is massive in the way that employee thinks about themselves. And so when we can realize that we are truly unique and special in the whole world, and yet at the same time realize that it's not because of us. It's not because of me. It's because I was created with divine fingerprints. Then I can be humble and yet I can be great at the same time. I can be a lion and I can be a lamb. I can love and give and serve and also lead with strength and vision and purpose and not come off of that. And sometimes come across offensive because I'm a visionary, and yet at other times be very meek. And I think those qualities, the more, and gosh, this is a journey. And as I think about it, I feel the journey of it. But when we can receive those qualities at the same time and carry them, that pool, that environment we create in our office will be so healthy. The production of our people will affect the business,
So good.
the bottom line,
Yeah,
the X's and
that's great.
O's, the finances.
Yeah. Wow. Well, there are, I think, 18 different topics that we could derail on or write books on or blogs on, and that's a lot to chew on. So as we wrap up here, maybe pretend you're asking this question now, and I've been asking it the past few shows that we've recorded, but if you put yourself in my seat, and I was over where you are, is there one question that you wished I had asked or that we had touched on in closing here as one final idea to leave with, as we've talked about a lot of things, you know?
Gosh, I think the most important part of this whole conversation is the next step. The most important, I think, part of any journey is the first step. Yeah. And so, you know, we've talked for 45 minutes. I didn't get the extended cut, 1 hour, but we've talked, and so what is one thing, small thing that we do different today or tomorrow, and to crystallize that in your mind. And so I think that is maybe where I would close, is to say, what is one action? And it could be symbolic action. It could be literal. It could be, it could be anything. But what is one small action that you'll take now? And just commit to that. Again, looking at that mountaintop and say, hey, my business is going in this direction, and I want to add some more of these aspects to it. So what's one small thing that I would do?
Well, Ryan, it has been a true gift. We are, humbled and blessed by your conversation today and your wisdom. And I know, once again, I have gotten so much out of this. And so I'm really hoping that our listeners and viewers will the same. So thank you for, leading and pouring into our community, and really excited to have you back on in the future and maybe talk about planning next time.
Yeah.
But we are so blessed by you. And thanks for coming on this morning.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming.
Yeah, thanks, Hunter.